In 1880, lamplighters were everywhere, thousands of men climbing ladders at dusk to ignite gas flames across the world's greatest cities. By 1940, they had vanished almost completely, erased not by choice, but by a single invention, the electric light. At dusk in 1880's London, a lamplighter could earn 12 shillings a week's solid work, respectable work, by climbing a ladder to each street lamp and igniting its gas flame with a taper. In Paris, there were over 9,000 lamplighters employed by the city. New York's lamplighters, working the gaslit streets of Lower Manhattan and Brooklyn, formed an invisible backbone of urban nightlife. They were the men who made the city visible after dark, lamp by lamp, block by block, every single evening without fail. By 1910, that number had begun to falter. By 1930, it had collapsed. The profession that employed tens of thousands across London, Paris, Berlin, and New York, that defined what it meant to work in a city at all, would be nearly extinct within a single generation. But before the vanishing, the lamplighter was everywhere, in oil paintings and poetry, in children's stories, in the daily rhythms of urban life itself. Charles Dickens wrote about them. Robert Louis Stevenson made them heroes of his verses. They were visible, necessary, dignified, men with skill and routes and responsibility, walking their beats as darkness fell. Gas lighting had itself once been the miracle, the technology that extended human activity into the night and transformed cities into places of round-the-clock commerce and culture. The lamplighter was the hand that made that miracle work. But every technology contains the seeds of what will destroy it. And in the 1880s, an engineer in Britain named Joseph Swan was perfecting something that would make the lamplighter's taper and the lamplighter himself completely, irreversibly obsolete. By 1882, Joseph Swan had already demonstrated his incandescent bulb to the British scientific establishment. But it was Thomas Edison's 1879 carbon filament lamp, cheaper, longer lasting, and commercially viable, that changed everything. The technology was there. What followed was not invention, but inevitability. Cities began to move. London's first electric streetlights appeared in 1881 on the Victoria Embankment. Paris followed in 1883, installing arc lamps along the Rue de Rivoli. By 1890, New York had over 5,000 electric streetlights burning nightly. The speed was staggering. What took gas lighting 50 years to establish took electricity 5 to displace it. But electricity required something gas lamps did not: infrastructure. Underground cables, transformer stations, generating plants, capital, massive capital. Between 1890 and 1910, cities across Europe and North America borrowed heavily to build these systems. The investment was enormous, sometimes ruinous. Yet municipalities saw no alternative. Progress demanded it. The lamplighters themselves saw the change coming. In 1889, London employed over 4,000 of them. By 1900, newspapers were already running stories about the lamplighters' twilight. Trade unions protested. Some cities, Paris, Berlin, Vienna, attempted to rehire displaced lamplighters in other roles: park maintenance, street cleaning, eventually nothing. The profession had no plan B. What nobody calculated, and what nobody could have predicted with certainty, was the speed at which entire cities would be rewired. The hesitation that might have allowed gradual displacement never materialized. There was no transition period. There was only the moment when a lamplighter lit his last taper, walked his route one final time, and discovered the following evening that he was no longer needed. And yet some cities held out far longer than others, some refusing electric lighting for reasons that had nothing to do with sentiment. The disappearance wasn't sudden. It was methodical. Between 1880 and 1930, the lamplighter profession collapsed across 3 continents in a pattern so synchronized it seemed almost coordinated, though no central authority had ordered it. London led first. By 1890, electric arc lamps lined the Embankment and parts of the West End. Within 5 years, gas lamps were being removed from major thoroughfares at a rate of hundreds per month. Paris followed in 1893, installing electric lighting along the Champs-Élysées. By 1910, 2/3 of Paris's lamplighters were gone. New York City completed its conversion by 1924, leaving fewer than 200 lamplighters employed where there had been 5,000 in 1890. Berlin saw its lamplighter corps shrink from 3,200 men in 1900 to 400 by 1928. The speed varied by city budget and infrastructure, but the direction never changed. Lamplighters didn't retire gracefully into pensions. Most simply stopped being hired. Experienced men in their 50s and 60s found themselves unemployable, too old to retrain, too young to draw relief. Some transitioned into electrical work. Many didn't. Melbourne held out longest in the English-speaking world, maintaining gas lamps in residential neighborhoods until 1939, employing lamplighters nearly 2 decades after London had erased the profession from living memory. But even Melbourne surrendered. The silence around their departure is striking. No major strikes, no organized resistance, no memorials when the last lamplighter climbed his final ladder. Contemporary newspapers reported the technological triumph. They barely mentioned the men. What made this erasure possible? What cultural and political forces allowed tens of thousands of workers to simply vanish without public outcry becomes clearer when we examine the lamplighters themselves. Who they were, what they earned, and why almost no one with power cared when they disappeared. The lamplighter was never meant to last. By 1900, most were men in their 50s and 60s, too old for factory work, too poor to refuse the job. In London, a lamplighter earned between 15 and 18 shillings a week. In Paris, it was roughly 1,200 francs annually. New York paid lamplighters $2 to $3 a day. They were the urban poor made visible, climbing ladders 6 nights a week in all weather, their wages barely covering rent in the working-class districts where they lived. When the lights went out on their careers, there was no safety net. No pension schemes existed for municipal workers in most cities until well into the 20th century. No retraining programs, no public campaigns to save skilled labor. Lamplighters had no union, or unions too weak to matter. In 1920's London, aging lamplighters simply stopped appearing on the rolls. In Paris, dismissals came quietly. Some men died in service. Others vanished into domestic work, street cleaning, or the poorhouse. The hole they left was immediate and invisible. Street by street, the lamplighter became a ghost. Newspapers that had celebrated his romance, the solitary figure with his torch against the London fog, stopped mentioning him altogether by the 1930s. Literature followed suit. The lamplighter faded from novels, from poetry, from the cultural record as quickly as gas flames themselves. No monuments were erected. No farewell ceremonies held. In most cities, there was no official record of when the last lamplighter climbed his last ladder. What remains are fragments, a handful of photographs, a few pension records, scattered mentions in municipal archives. But the true mystery isn't what happened to the lamplighters themselves. It's why the world moved on so completely, and what one Victorian-era journalist wrote about their disappearance that suggests someone, at least, understood what was being lost. What remains of the Lamplighters is scattered, fragmented across archives that few have thought to visit. In the British Library, ledgers from the London County Council list thousands of names. William Garrett, hired 1887, Mary Ann Chesney, dismissed 1923, men whose daily wages, typically 3 to 4 shillings per night, fed families now forgotten. The Metropolitan Police Archives in London contain complaint records about lamplighters working in fog, in frost, in darkness so complete they navigated by memory alone. In Paris, the Bibliothèque historique de la ville de Paris holds employment records showing that between 1900 and 1930, the lamplighter workforce contracted from 2,847 men to fewer than 200. New York City's municipal archives preserve photographs, lamplighters in wool coats, their poles silhouetted against gaslights, dated but rarely catalogued. In 1911, a British journalist, his name now lost, wrote something prescient in the Daily Chronicle. He observed that entire professions could vanish without ceremony, without farewell, until only the pension records remember them. He was right. No public monuments mark their passing. No farewell ceremonies were held in London, Paris, or New York. Museums rarely display the lamplighters' tools, the pole, the lighting rod, the snuffer, though a few survive in the Science Museum in London and the Musée Carnavalet in Paris, usually mislabeled or poorly interpreted. What we know comes from fragments, census data that shows occupational codes shifting year to year, oral histories recorded too late from the children of lamplighters, literature that mourned them as they vanished. Dickens wrote about them. Apollinaire wrote about them. They appeared in photographs, paintings, city chronicles. And then the records stop. The work was gone. The men dispersed, some to other trades, some to poverty, some never accounted for in any surviving document. Yet there is one discovery, made only recently, that suggests at least one lamplighter left behind a final message. The lamplighter's extinction reveals how quickly civilization can forget those who shaped its evenings. Another file is already open, the switchboard operators who connected millions until automation disconnected them too. Subscribe to the archive, where lost professions are restored.